Let's see what our political panel thinks on this issue and the rest of the day's political news. I'm joined now by the Parliamentary Secretary for Communications, Paul Fletcher, and the Shadow Parliamentary Secretary for Industry and a few other things as well, Stephen Jones. Thanks for your time this afternoon to both of you. First to you, Paul Fletcher, on these terms of inquiry for the car industry, first of all, are they broad enough? Are they, will this report come in soon enough to save the car industry in this country?
Well, good afternoon, David. And the Minister for Industry, Ian Macfarlane, and the Treasurer, Joe Hockey, have announced the terms of reference for this inquiry. And the intention, of course, is to get the facts, to conduct a rigorous investigation of the facts that will inform the way that we go forward. So obviously we're going to proceed as quickly as we can, but we do need to take the time to have a proper and thorough investigation of the facts so that the policy that or the position we finally take forward is the right one.
Stephen Jones, it seems the government is backing up its talk of calm, methodical government when it comes to this review into the car industry. Is this the right approach, or is more urgency needed?
Well, methodical, absolutely, but this has got to be one of the most investigated and reviewed sectors of the Australian economy. Not for no reason. Over 55,000 people are directly employed, close to 250,000 indirectly employed. One of the most capital-intensive areas of our economy. You'd think, after all that has been said in the Parliament and elsewhere by the opposition, the then opposition and now government on this sector, that had come into government with a plan. Clearly, we've got to have an industry that makes cars that people want to buy. Clearly, they've got to have a plan as an industry for the future. That's what our $500 million automotive transformation plan was all about. We're willing to work with the government to ensure that we have a future for the industry, but some certainty is needed.
Labor's policies didn't save Ford, though, shutting its doors in 2016, I think it is.
Yeah, look, clearly there were some issues in Ford, and when I made the comment earlier that we've got to have a sector that is making cars that people want to buy, Ford is a standout example there. There have been calls from the Coalition and others, many commentators over the last 20 years, that if the government is going to continue to support the car industry, then there's got to be some efficiencies going on within the sector. I mean, a lot of the job setting that you have seen over the last decade has been a direct result of some of that efficiency working its way through the system. But look, Labor stands for a future for the auto industry in this country. We want to see those high-tech, high-value jobs continue to exist, critical to the economies in parts of Melbourne and South Australia as well.
David,
Paul Fletcher,
if I can just pick up that...
You can respond. Yeah, all right, go for it first.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up the point about Ford and remind you and your viewers that the then Prime Minister Julia Gillard announced a package in relation to Ford. I think it was $20 to $30 million or so, and it was really only within 12 to 18 months of that that we then had the announcement from Ford in relation to not continuing to manufacture in Australia. So we, by contrast, rather than that sort of ad hoc approach, we are going through this thorough process with a comprehensive review being conducted by a very respected government agency. We're obviously doing it as quickly as we can, but we need to take the time to systematically look at the issues and produce a quality output.
Yes, because the Shadow Industry Minister, Senator Kim Carr, has called into question the timing of the completion of this review, saying that it's just a ruse to avoid the South Australian election. Of course, the car industry, a big issue in that state. Paul Fletcher.
I'm not surprised that Kim Carr is looking at it through a political lens. The whole point is we are looking at this as a very serious exercise to get the facts and assemble them in a logical and coherent fashion. The terms of reference of this review are very comprehensive. It's looking at the industry's current structure, productivity, investment, profitability, workforce structures and practices. So it's a very comprehensive review. We're doing it as quickly as can be done, given the need to cover these issues thoroughly. And unfortunately, I think Senator Carr has simply resorted to a political response. Well, we're looking at this much more seriously.
frankly, I
Okay,
think...
stay with us here on Lunchtime Agenda. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more right after this.
There's no better bet than a sporting bet. That's why we created Best Tote Plus. You're guaranteed the best price of the 3 totes plus an extra 5% on top of your winnings on all Australian thoroughbred races. So with Best Tote Plus, when you're on the right horse, you'll always finish in front of the tabs. It's only from Sporting Bet, so download the app or go to sportingbet.com.au to beat the tabs every race, every time. Just another reason why there's no better bet than a sporting bet.
If you're 30 or over, you're guaranteed to save when you switch your comprehensive car insurance to Coles Car Insurance. So make the move today and save with
Coles Middle Red Quad. Gummy bears, Clinkers, Chalk biscuits.
Introducing 2 new Cadbury Dairy Milk Marvellous Creations. Out now.
Hey babe, don't forget we're babysitting my sister's kids tonight. I see. The idea of children is so disgusting to you.
There's no place for soy aftertaste face. Devondale Fast Start, made with real milk, not soy.
Visa Pay Wave. For purchases under $100, just wave and go.
Syria's children share the same dreams and hopes as Australia's children, but their lives are being destroyed by a war that has killed nearly 7,000 children and forced 3 million more to flee their homes. The survivors are desperate for food, water and shelter. Save the Children is on the ground saving and protecting lives, but more children urgently need your help. Please donate today and give them hope. Call 1800 760011 or visit savethechildren.org.au. Thank you.
At the precise moment a tomato hung heavy on its vine, quinoa was picked by the boxful, wheat was harvested, lettuce was plucked from the ground, cheese ripened perfectly, and delicious combinations of seeds and grains were skillfully kneaded together. And now, all these ingredients are about to become even more delicious together. It's not just bread, it's Helga's.
Thanks for your company on Lunchtime Agenda. I'm still joined by Stephen Jones and Paul Fletcher. I want to turn to the supermarket price wars that have been great for consumers in the short term, but the Small Business Minister Bruce Bilson is concerned about what that is doing to suppliers up the chain. If they shut down, he fears, then ultimately, of course, the shoppers will be the losers. Paul Fletcher, this inquiry into competition when it comes to the grocery giants in particular, what can that actually achieve? Are we looking at changing competition laws or cracking down on competition, which is bringing prices down? I'm just a little unclear on what this inquiry is looking into.
Well, during the election campaign, we promised a root and branch review into competition law, and in his speech today, Minister Bilson talked about the issue of suppliers to the large supermarkets and others in the value chain, and the issues that they've raised with both sides of politics over a number of years. So the policy commitment we made was to have a root and branch review of competition law and really have a look at how it's operating and, amongst other things, its impact on the small business players that we now have Minister Bilson as a cabinet minister with responsibility for small business. So that's really the intention that the Minister was talking about today, to give effect to a very clear promise made by the coalition during the campaign that we would have a root and branch review of the competition.
There wouldn't be a crackdown on the supermarket giants when it came to the competition that they are having against each other and against some of the overseas supermarkets as well, like Aldi and Costco and the like?
Oh, look, certainly there is vigorous competition between the supermarket players. Competition law, of course, has both vertical and horizontal aspects. And so, as Minister Bilston made clear in his speech today, that's one of the issues that he wants this review to have a look at. On the one hand, yes, you have vigorous price and service competition between the supermarkets, but he also wants the review to have a look at the transactions that occur between supermarkets and their suppliers. Some of their suppliers are big players, some of their suppliers are smaller players, and the purpose of this review, amongst other things, is to look at those issues in that bargaining relationship.
Stephen Jones, what should the government be doing to protect these suppliers?
Frankly, I think they've missed the point. I agree with Paul, we do have pretty robust competition within the grocery and retail sector. Recently, or more recently, we've seen Aldi enter the field and other players. One of the biggest growths in the retail sector is those medium-tier players. The issue that suppliers are complaining about is not competition, it's bargaining power. Labor gets collective bargaining, Labor gets bargaining power. Unfortunately, the coalition have got a blind spot when it comes to those sorts of things. The things that the suppliers are complaining about is when they sit down to negotiate with Coles or Woolworths or their wholesale suppliers. It's not a negotiation, it's here's the contract, take it or leave it, and every year they're clipping the ticket and coming back with less and less in terms of margin. That's the real issue, and until the coalition grasps that nettle, we will see continued pressure for the suppliers and both the goods suppliers and the service suppliers to these large retail giants.
Isn't it interesting that the moment Stephen hears the word bargaining, he can't help but add in the word collective? It must be those old union official instincts coming out. Look, the reality is that bargaining power as between companies at different stages in the value chain, from retail up to wholesale and so on, is certainly a competition issue. It's always been understood to be a competition issue, and that very much falls within the scope of the issues that this review is intended to have a look at, and most importantly, an opportunity for those who have concerns about practices in this sector to come forward and put the evidence so that that can then be carefully assessed. So again, a thorough and careful look at the evidence with a view to determining whether any changes to policy are needed. And again, very characteristic of the way the Abbott government is operating, methodically, calmly, working through the issues consistent with the promises that we made during the campaign and previously, and making sure that any decisions we make are very soundly based on a thorough look at the evidence.
Well, the reports have been coming down thick and fast today because the Climate Change Authority, which is an apolitical government body, has handed down its report on what it believes the emissions reductions targets should actually be. Currently they're 5%. That is a 5% reduction on 2000 levels by the year 2020. The Climate Change Authority says that's not good enough and has recommended in its draft report 2 options, either 15% by 2020 or 25% by 2020. Paul Fletcher, is that realistic?
Well, the government won't be changing the target. We've made that clear. It is worth making the point that that 5% reduction target is a reduction on 2000 levels. So in 2000, emissions from Australia were about 550 million tonnes. So they need to get down to 520, 530, in other words 5% less than that. Now on a business as usual basis, we would be likely to be in the high 600s by 2020. So it's actually a pretty demanding cut that both the Coalition and the Labor Party have committed to. There is bipartisan support for this 5% reduction target. It's been there for quite a while, and it is significant and demanding, and the direct action plan is the policy means that we are pursuing to achieve that target.
Stephen Jones, should that target be revisited?
Look, we should continually to be guided by the science and the economics on this issue, and Paul and his government have said a lot over the last few weeks about their commitment to method and evidence. It's just unfortunate in this area they refuse to acknowledge the evidence of the economists and of the scientists, and have committed themselves to something called direct action, which is indirect, and there's no action involved. What we know is, and every expert is telling the government this, their plan won't work. And it's probably the reason that they accept their plan won't work is that the legislation that they've put out for exposure and comment removes the legislated legal limit on carbon emissions. That is, they're removing the legal requirement to reduce those emissions. They may still say they've got a target, but nothing they are doing, in fact everything they are doing, including removing their obligation to meet this target within the law, is pushing that objective further and further away. I guess, as Malcolm Turnbull himself said, this is the sort of policy you adopt when you actually want to junk it in the first place.
Well,
scientists and many economists, Stephen Jones, have also recommended that that 5% target should be raised, as this report today suggests. So I'll ask you again, should it be raised?
Look, what we should be doing is putting in place policies which enable us to meet our existing target and have a plan to reduce our target, reduce our carbon emissions over time. That is, to put in place more aggressive carbon reduction plans in place. In fact, Labor went into the last election with exactly that policy, an objective of significant reductions out to 2050. So we're already on target to do exactly that.
And of course,
we're almost out of time, but I just wanted to ask you, Paul Fletcher, about an area in your portfolio, that being communications, and the continuing ban on Huawei and involvement in the national broadband network. George Brandis has said after security briefings he's going to continue on with the government's policy. But could there be any role, do you believe, for Huawei in the NBN?
You've seen the statement from Attorney General Brandis in which he made the point that no decision has been made by the new government to change the existing policy, the position we inherited from the previous government. I don't really have anything more to add to that.
OK, we have to leave it there. Stephen Jones and Paul Fletcher, thanks so much for your time on Lunchtime Agenda today. Thank you very much for your company at home. I'm David Lipson. That's all for the show. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow, but the news is coming up next with Selena Edmonds and Newsday. Don't go away.